We're going to go ahead and get started. Can y'all hear me? Okay, great. My name is Clancy Dixon. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the City of Durango. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Before I get too far into the agenda this evening, I wanted to introduce somebody. We have Olivia DePablo. The city is trying its best to offer translation services and do a little bit more in terms of language justice. And so I have Olivia here to introduce herself and what that looks like from her point of view.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Olivia DePablo, and I am the Language Justice Coordinator under La Plata for Equity Coalition with our Community Language Research Group. I wanted to extend a really heartfelt thank you to the City of Durango for opening spaces to have language accessibility. Even though we don't have, I am assuming we don't have anybody today who might need interpretation. If you do, just please come see me. I'm sitting on that table. But also that we are able to speak the language of our heart. The city is working really hard in our region and bringing communities of colors to these conversations. And I am going to repeat this in Spanish. Buenas noches a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Gracias por permitirme hablar en mi idioma del corazón y poder tener accesibilidad a la justicia del lenguaje. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Of course. Okay, we also wanted to introduce that we have childcare available this evening. It doesn't look like anybody needs childcare, but that also is an effort that we have going on. Laughing you are. Anyway, so just know that we are putting efforts into that as well, trying to get families to come out if they want to participate in the in-person forum as well. So that was an option this evening. Doesn't look like it's being utilized. And then here's our agenda. So we have our welcomes, and then we're going to jump into a quick poll this evening, an informational presentation. We're going to have a quick Q&A about that informational presentation. And then from there, we're going to jump into breakout sessions in these tables. That's why we have markers and the flip chart set up at the table. So we'll ask you to consolidate eventually, and you'll have to get kind of cozy and talk to your neighbors for that. And then we'll do a closing poll and then let you know what's coming next, okay? I also wanted to point out we have QR codes that will be in the presentation, also on the table over there for those of you, for survey. We want to know how we did in this public forum. We always want to be improving in how we're asking the community for feedback. And so if you could take the time, it's a 5-minute maybe survey to complete that, that helps us out in those efforts and make sure that we're meeting your needs when we're asking you for information. So really appreciate the extra effort there. How many of you found the project page already on the Engage Durango website? Okay, there's an Engage Durango website, engage.durangoco.gov. This project is listed on that page. It asks for your feedback there. We'll put the polls that we're going to do tonight on that page. We'll put the slides. We'll do a recording. Hopefully that recording turns out okay. And we'll put that on the page as well, and then keep you informed there. You can follow the project. There's like a follow button on that page. So check that out as well. But I'll turn it over to Sarah Hill.
Thanks, Clancy. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Hill. I am the Transportation Director, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of the other city staff that we have in the room tonight at your service. So here we have Tom Sluice. He's our PIO officer for the city. Evan Roth is walking away, but he keeps all the lights on, all the mics on, so we really appreciate him being here. Tracy Changer, she is the customer service lead for the transportation department. Next to her, you see Andrew Bedore, who is with Walker Consultants. Wade Moore is our parking operations manager. I hope you all have had an opportunity to have a great interaction with him at some point. We have Bob Brammer, our assistant city manager, and Kylene Jones, she is helping with childcare if anyone finds a child. And I skipped over Kenzie Coulson, who is actually going to be leading us in a really in-depth presentation about neighborhood parking permits. And we'll turn it over to her in just a little bit, but I wanted to sort of give a little bit of information and recognize that you all are here for a discussion tonight about the need or interest in a managed parking program in neighborhoods in downtown, in the eastern side of downtown business district. So this project came to my staff through public request, and it was also identified in the comprehensive parking management plan that was adopted by City Council last year as a potential recommendation. So Third Avenue specifically does meet all the baseline criteria to consider managed parking in the neighborhood. So we are not going to be making a decision tonight. What we are here to understand from you is there a need? Is there a parking problem in your neighborhood? Is there interest? There are two potential outcomes for tonight's meeting. One, if it's obvious that there's not enough support for a managed parking program, there won't be further staff action at this time. But two, if it does come out that there's support for pursuing some type of a managed parking program, staff is prepared to start following the recommendations in the parking management plan. First, we would go to City Council and bring your interest to City Council and request for funding to support the project. If funded, we would begin having conversations about the neighborhood boundaries. What's the definition of the neighborhood? And we will start talking about the variety of options. And as you'll see, there are quite a lot of considerations to find the right size program for a neighborhood. So like I said, staff is standing by. We're very interested to hear from you. We are ready to move in whichever direction the majority of the community and residents indicate. So also I did want to say we understand that there are some concerns related to parking and other current city projects that are in progress, such as Downtown's Next Step, the City Civic Center, the Midtown Safety Project. We are aware that all of these projects will be impacting parking, and they're not happening in isolation. We're considering everything together. With that said, we are not going to be going into any of those other projects tonight. There will be a lot of opportunities for each one of those projects in future forums to get really into the details of those projects. But we are respectfully asking that we do stay on track at this 30,000 level discussion about your interest in a residential parking program. So with that said, we're very grateful to have consultants from Walker Consultant joining us tonight and lending their expertise to this process. And I'm going to turn it over to Kenzie Coulson to educate us a little bit about downtown neighborhood parking program.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Kenzie Coulson, and we're going to talk a little bit more about my background and my colleague Andrew Bedore as well, who's here to answer questions and lend expertise as well. First, quickly, I want to reiterate this agenda. We're going to do a quick poll, and that means that before we get into the educational content of this session and talk more about the granularity of best practices, we're going to ask that you answer a quick question, and then we'll do the same thing later. After that, we'll get into some of the meat of this presentation, and I ask that you consider holding your comments really carefully. We won't have time to stop for questions throughout the course of the main presentation, but we do have a Q&A session, and I really want to reiterate that you're thinking of those granular level questions and saving them up so that we have a chance to address them, and or so that you have a chance to channel them into these table breakout sessions. All the feedback from today is so important, so please keep that in mind and try to remember everything you may think of throughout the course of what we talk about. So all that said, the goal of this session today is to better understand where parking east of downtown may be an issue or a sore spot for residents, for visitors, for other stakeholders, and if there is support to move forward. And so Sarah explained some of this already, but we will talk more about those steps in just a few moments. On the screen, we have a QR code here. And so if you think about this like you're at a restaurant, if you take your phone out and get your camera on this QR, You can quickly sync up with this. Click the little yellow link, it usually is yellow. And it's going to come up with a poll. We'd love it if you'd like to participate in this. Again, every bit of feedback from today is taken really seriously. And so what you'll find if you click on that link is that it's going to ask you these couple of questions. Number one, do you experience a parking problem at your residence? And that is east of downtown. And so we recognize there could be some folks in here. Is there anyone who is not a resident from the east side of downtown? Business owners, perhaps? No?
I'm a resident of downtown.
Okay, all right, wonderful. So you're close in the pool.
If you can't access it, raise your hand.
All right, so what I want to point out about this, these questions are self-explanatory generally, but I want to clarify something that the second question notes. Are you able to find a parking space within two blocks of your residence? Now that 2-block quantification is important. If a neighborhood parking permit program were to move forward, the understanding would be that kind of program cannot specifically reserve spaces in front of homes. A program like that can make space within a 2-block radius. And so we'll talk more about that at a more detailed level in just a minute, but please bear in mind that 2 blocks is important when you're answering this question. All right, how are we doing? Everybody good? Okay. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. It is really wonderful to see this kind of turnout, this kind of engagement and connection in a community. Really, really warms my heart that you're here to talk about parking. We are here to talk about parking. It's a notorious word, right? This is something that can create a lot of emotion, and I want to acknowledge that. So how many people here are excited to talk about parking?
Oh.
Go on. Go on. Okay, all right. All right, well, you don't have to be excited. I promise this is going to be an educational session and enjoyable. And again, what you contribute today is going to feed the next step. So it's very, very awesome that your city is committed to doing this. So what we find in a lot of communities is that there's a growth factor. And we all come to a community and we move in and we nestle in and we know that community and we love it based on what we know it to be. And as it grows, that's where emotion can come into play. That's where the planning process becomes ever more important. And so what we want to talk about today is a little bit of that dynamic as related to neighborhood parking permit programs, the best practices, the considerations, the recommendations, and all of the things that may not be as transparent about a parking permit program. It sounds simple, right? It sounds like kind of an easy little thing that we might do. So let's backtrack a little bit. We will talk introductions at a deeper level here. I'm a parking consultant. I live in Park City, Utah, a little town you may have heard of. In fact, I drove here today through Moab. It's a very beautiful drive. Park City's similar to Durango, maybe not as cute, honestly, might not be. But it is a very similar community in the sense that it's grown quite a bit. And when that happens, we have to start thinking about best practice measures in many different ways, how best to accommodate that growth and how best to make sure that we're connecting as a community and making several initiatives happen surrounding these ideas. I am joined today by Andrew Vidor, who is in the back of the room. He is a principal colleague with Walker. He is very, very knowledgeable in the area of parking. So we'll get him up here when we get into some Q&A, as he's touched a lot of communities and offered a lot of planning support for many, many folks. He's also worked locally here in Durango on our comprehensive parking management plan in recent years. My background is in parking operations management. I used to manage parking for the municipality Park City. After that, I managed a complex mixed-use private sector campus in downtown Salt Lake. I've done an array of event management, traffic mitigation plans, and launched large-scale technology initiatives. And so all of that said, I've had a lot of experience with how to implement programs and how we feel about them and how they are often not one little thing. And by that, I mean that we as humans like to think about the silver bullet. We like to say, okay, we're going to do this one thing and it's going to change our world. This one thing is going to make everything better. And when we talk about a growth factor in a community like this and managing the elements such as parking, it really does not come down to one thing. We have to look comprehensively at a number of initiatives and strategies and management tactics. And we need to listen to a vast number of stakeholder groups. And so it is quite a bit more complex. And I want to just start the presentation by making sure that message is out there, because we're not talking about neighborhood parking permits if it should go forward as saving the world, right? We're talking about many, many different things that would have to come together, many strategies and many considerations. So all of that said, we're fortunate that Durango takes this very seriously. The city initiatives for planning are robust and amazing. And so what we've got on this slide on the right-hand side is a summary of all of these various plans that are designed to support and create strong initiatives for Durango that are unified. You'll notice that while these are diverse in nature, all of these plans have a parking vein and a parking component. And because I am a parking consultant, I like to talk about parking, but it really is something that is important to consider within the context of all of these other things, especially when it comes to right-size parking initiatives and understanding where your supply and demand is and how a strategy might be able to better balance what asset you have. Most recently, Walker Consultants helped support the comprehensive parking management plan in 2022-23. And this plan is, it's an easy read of, 100 pages or so. How many people have seen the plan? A few.
I have another question. Is it possible to turn off your overhead light so that we can see the screen?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if these lights are not on, but there may be some.
There you
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So the comprehensive parking management plan is a recent endeavor, and this thing is a substantial report, and it's something that I highly recommend that you get acquainted with. It talks about an assessment of past parking studies. It looks at population growth estimates. It projects supply and demand needs. And most importantly, it offers a parking management toolbox. And so within the report, there are several things that the city can look at to do to shift the vitality and make this a better place and follow some of these larger ideas that we just saw on the list of plans there. And so I recommend looking this up. It's really cool, and you don't have to read every 100-page word. It is broken into sections, and it can give you a sense of how complex and how many things there may be that the city may have interest in doing in the near or far future. One of the elements in this plan, of course, was the neighborhood parking permit idea. And the east of downtown came out as a hot topic. The data suggested that there is not just interest, but also some potential demand for reviewing a program like this. So what is the purpose of a neighborhood parking permit program? Well, this is a strategy that is used to help manage that imbalance. And so in the graphic here, you see essentially we've got the downtown area, perhaps visitors, perhaps employees spilling into that residential area, and then creating perhaps maybe an environment where access is not quite as balanced as we want it to be. Again, there are a lot of needs here. We've got a lot of different players in this equation. There are businesses, there are employees, there are visitors, there are residents, there are renters, there are other folks who come to the neighborhood for other purposes like maintenance or cleaning homes. So it's a lot of different types of activity. The benefits of a neighborhood parking program are, generally speaking, to preserve that access and safety, to reduce any hazards and congestion. And in most cases, it really relates directly to the residents being able to access their homes in a way that keeps the livability good, right? We want to make sure that residents don't have a burden in getting in their front door. The tricky thing about a neighborhood parking program is that that space in front of residential homes is actually a public right-of-way. And so that right-of-way belongs to the public collectively for the city to manage. And so there are safety and access issues that need to be addressed within that area in front of the residential homes. There has to be space for the utilities or drainage. There has to be ability for maintenance to happen, walkways, sidewalks, bikeways, and general access for all types of uses and patrons. It is a public resource, and the equity of that really does have to be balanced among many types of users. And so often when we buy a home, we think about that home and that space in front of the home as ours. We often think, well, I live here, that's my street, that's my sidewalk, that's my area to park, and I want to park right in front of my home. But that area in front of residential is actually the public right-of-way. It does not belong as a part of the property line. It doesn't belong to the resident. And it's really got to be managed collectively for all the reasons on the screen. Now, I bring this up because it is something that we all often think about. Again, it looks like our area, it looks like ours, but a neighborhood parking program is not going to reserve these spaces in front of homes. And what you'll see in the photo here is one of my neighbors, and I've blocked out their address just for anonymity purposes, but this is illegal. What they've done here is they've placed some signs to reserve the spaces in front of their home. It's not okay. It should not be an exception, an expectation that this would ever be acceptable within the context of a residential permit program. In terms of the best practices for neighborhood permit programs, the area size, the parking data, the petitioning, there are several factors that need to be considered. And so I'm going to go through this just as general best practice. These are items contained in the comprehensive parking management plan, but they all will feed direction of next steps should there be, again, enough interest here. The area size is important because we can't effectively create a program in a very small footprint. It's got to be substantial enough in size to justify the labor and the cost. And potentially, if you make it too small, you're going to see a spillover factor like we saw on the slide where if we block access from one block range, cars are likely to go to the next block range. And it just basically squeezes the bubble, so to speak, of the problems here. And now it's just a little bit over here. The size needs to be contiguous. And by that, I mean you can't have a sliver of space in between a managed area and another managed area, because again, the same factor can happen where cars that were maybe in that area that were not balanced, were over flooding some residential. Now they've just moved into whatever space is left. So the area's got to be considered as contiguous. It's got to be concise. It's got to be large enough. The other big factor is that the data has to suggest that there is justification for this. If there's a sliver of area where cars are there 100% of the time, that's not going to cut it for a program like this. It's got to be occupied 70% of the time, at least 4 days a week. It's got to, within the data collection model, consider nighttime and weekend and weekday collection so that, again, we're not looking at slivers of time or slivers of locations where there might be an issue at just one moment in time. It's important to think about events and exclude those, because those should be considered as perhaps something that is addressed in an event management or event mitigation plan, as opposed to a permit program that is quite robust, like a neighborhood program. And importantly, within the data collection, there need to be consideration of what numbers happen in the nighttime data, meaning how many residents are parking there after hours. And so there has to be a distinction there where we can see what happens in the day versus night to demonstrate the true demand for residents. If the data suggests that it's over 70% occupied and that all these factors have been considered, at that point, a process typically involves a resident or resident group to collect signatures from 51% or more of the property addresses within this proposed area. Typically, the requirement is that that's one signature per address and that the signatures must be from residents. The city can then, in a process like this, check for eligibility, review the proposed area, and basically do due diligence at that point to see if this area might meet some of the recommendations and some of the parameters.
Do residents include renters?
Renters are not considered residents. The owners of the property are residents.
So you would go to landlords to get signatures?
Correct, correct. And so if there were 51% of residents interested in the group who had signed a petition, at that point, the city would schedule a public meeting, do some outreach, collect feedback, perhaps modify the area, perhaps look at it more granularly in terms of what other management practices might be available. And at that point, modifications may happen. At that point, the city would then move forward with creating an official ballot, mailing that ballot again to the resident owners. And those ballots returned would have to equate to 51% of the resident base total. If that were to happen, then the program could move forward for a regulation to approve. Now, the 51% thing I know is interesting, right? What if not all 100% ballots come back? And that's very likely. We need to think about it as 51% of the existing residences. So regardless of how many come back, you're still looking for that same number of 51%. So let's say the permit program moves forward, and at that point, the operational considerations come into play. And so it's important that we think about the money and time and labor in implementing any programs with the city. These things cost money. And so you'll see on the left that there's a cost recovery element. Cost, again, it touches all of us. In this case, creating a program will cost residents time to work on the project for themselves, gain permits, prove their eligibility, distribute permitting to visitors, to other employees or other folks accessing their homes. There is a work, a time, a cost component for the resident themselves. In terms of the city costs, there's a labor for administrative, meaning that, again, to distribute permits requires a process for understanding how many permits for eligibility, collecting a fee for those, assessing the eligibility of other folks. And that requires documentation. It requires admin time. In some cases, it requires support of a technology. And that technology for admin use could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet where everything is written on paper and someone is manually looking at documents. It could be as sophisticated as a specific parking portal where residents upload documents. But all of these are considerations. Softwares cost money, admin hours cost money. For a program to be effective, it also needs to have a compliance component. And by that, I mean that there will need to be some type of enforcement. If we just hand out permits and we do nothing to make sure that those permits are used correctly and in the correct locations at the correct times, the program will be ineffective. And so in the case of this area in particular, the enforcement hours could require modification. There would be considerations on how best to make sure that the compliance for the program is good enough that it actually serves the purpose of the program. Infrastructure is another cost, and in many cases that can mean signage or poles. In some cases, operational considerations might also dictate that we consider things like time limit zones or even paid parking or pay stations. And while paid parking may not be a popular item to talk about, there can be management techniques within some of these ideas that cost money but actually create that balance that we're looking for. So to give you a little bit of a sense of what proof is required typically in a program like this, usually it's proof of vehicle registration, it is a mortgage document, it might involve proof of utilities or mail. And in many cases, all of that feeds into the understanding that the city will be able to accurately preserve the integrity of the program. If the city were to say, I'm just going to hand out permits like candy, I'm just going to give them out to whoever, well, all of a sudden those permits are going to find their way into the hands of some of those folks who are parking in the residential already, and it could undermine the whole idea of what the goal is. So it's important to understand that while I'm talking about things that seem maybe unnecessary for a small town, if a program doesn't consider these things, it can be very, very dangerous. So I've just talked a little bit about the process for distributing permits, creating compliant environments, but within that engagement process for residents, it's also important to understand that if you're in a situation where, let's say 51% of the folks in this area want this permit program to move forward and 49% don't, we may be in a spot where there are your neighbors, your direct neighbors who are going, man, I don't want to do this. And that is something that we should think about a little bit. Again, I come from Park City, Utah. It's a town of many voices, many wonderful residents with wonderful voices. And I've had the privilege of managing the parking there and speaking with many of them. One particular resident, I will call him Billy Bob. That's not his real name, but Billy Bob is a construction foreman. He owns his own business. He is a wonderful, wonderful person. He's been in Park City 30 years. He lives in the Old Town, which is right near Main Street. He's a caring person. If you saw him in the coffee shop, you'd say, hey, Billy Bob, and he'd be like, what is up? Hey, man, he'd probably give you a discount on his work. This is a beloved person in the community. Well, Billy Bob didn't want to do the residential permit program. And what always struck me about this is that he's a warm and genuine and caring person, but because he didn't want to do the program and engage and provide documentation and show the city his license plates and play nice with his neighbors, it actually created a lot of contention. And so the reason I'm sharing this is I just want everybody to think for a second that we want to be broad about understanding the emotion here and understanding what we may want to review as a city, what options we may have. But it is important that the data demonstrates demand and that the overwhelming demand from the voters recognizes that people are in. If you've got a lot of Billy Bobs who are not going to want to participate, it also undermines the whole integrity of the program and the whole thing can fall flat on its face. And meanwhile, you spent a lot of money, you've done a lot of work, the city's done a lot of work. Importantly, it's not as simple as just the residents. We've got renters in these areas, we've got businesses, business employees, visitors who come for the barbecue. We've got to think about all the cleaning staff or maintenance staff or vendors who might need to do work. And so that's a lot of groups. And I bring that up just because it's, again, often easy to say, just give me a permit, city, and this is going to be an easy thing for us to move forward. Well, it's not that easy. The city will have to come up with parameters and operational considerations for all of these groups, how to regulate the number of permits, how to make sure that the function of this doesn't flood your system. Again, permits handed out like candy are not going to be resulting in an effective situation. So the study area has been identified at this point, is demonstrated in this blue line here, from 3rd Ave to 8th Ave, or basically the Mesa, about 15th Street to 1st Street. This area has some natural border lines, and the goals in identifying this area really come from the idea that the city would not want spillover to affect anyone deeper into the neighborhood. And so I think we can talk more about this in the breakout groups. I think we want to make sure that you're addressing feedback related to this area, but know that we can't have areas that aren't contiguous. We can't have an area that's too small. It's got to be justifiably large enough and not creating those gaps for spillover. Some of the operational management strategies that I touched on earlier include time limits, permits, of course, which we've been talking about all along. Paid parking could be something that is really effective in certain areas, or perhaps even very small sections that really border businesses or the downtown. Compliance and education is another component to this. We need everybody on board. We need to make sure that everyone is aware of the rules and participating in an active manner. And then importantly, with any program, it is a best practice measure to make sure that the city maintains engagement and continues to collect data, continues to evolve the program based on data and feedback. And so your city officials have demonstrated a sincere level of outreach initiative, and we don't always see that. So you're very fortunate to have folks here who are not only doing a lot in the planning world, thinking a lot about where the direction of Durango should go, but trying to bring everyone along here too. And so that is admirable. We heard about this from Sarah just at the beginning of the meeting here, but essentially that comprehensive parking plan that was just done created a lot of motion to have this conversation, and that's why we're here. Based on the data from the study, based on the feedback from those moments, we are still in the infant stages of this idea moving forward. However, we can look at this as a moment where we can bypass that data collection and initial petition should there be some demonstration of interest here. That said, we're still in that very first box where there may be some additional assessment required and condition eligibility review. We would foresee that if there's momentum, there would need to be preparation for a council report and council acceptance of moving forward with something like this. If that were to happen, then the city would re-engage and kind of redefine a more granular timeline. I know that everybody's probably like, well, what do you mean by this, taking all these steps? How long does that take? Well, it's hard to say exactly, and I don't think that we can put an exact date on it, but what we can do is promise that if there's motion forward, then the city will be back at you after this potential council meeting in the second box. The voting would still need to happen, as outlined in the previous slide that we talked about. The city would create a ballot, mail a ballot, and those ballots would have to be returned at 51% rate. If all of that goes forward, the next step would be to create the operational program. and think about those administrative hours. Think about how residents will support providing documentation. Think about how the permit distribution process will happen for visitors. All of these little details, signs, ideas for how best to educate the community.
Could you tell me about this ballot? Now, we have registered voters who include, renters. Would the ballot go only to people that are eligible to weigh in on this? Or would it go to the entire electorate?
The ballot would go to the homeowners. So this is a little different.
We're about a couple minutes out from Q&A, so just hang on just a
Yep.
little bit longer.
Let's get through this. We're so close. I want to just say one more thing about the process and next steps. And so let's say that this thing rolls forward, and again, there are many things to consider. But perhaps the last and most important step would be that engagement and educational piece with every member of the area to make sure that everyone is really on board and understanding how to interact, how to do basic business, how to hold a barbecue and make sure that they have visitor permits. All of these little granular details are important and will need to be well communicated, well vetted, and distributed. And so that requires some time as well. So all of that said, I know I just kind of threw a lot at you there, but we'd like to at this point open up for questions. And once we get through the questions, we'll do a little bit more intensive breakout session with your tables.
All right, so we're gonna jump into the question and answer session. I wanna just say a couple things before we do that. Know that the breakout session is coming, where we're gonna ask you for feedback, where you're gonna be able to give us your thoughts, your feelings, all that, in small groups at these tables, so that's coming. The question and answer isn't a spot for that, just to be clear. The question and answer is to get the information that you need in order to let us know how you feel in this next step. We're gonna spend nearly an hour getting how you feel and getting your feedback about an NPP. But what questions do you have in order to form that opinion or to move forward with being able to give us that feedback? So think about that. We're gonna have this go on for 10 to 15 minutes, the question and answer. We'll jump into the feedback portion, which is those breakout sessions, or those breakout tables, and then we'll let you know how we're gonna follow up with all this and kind of do a closing. So, any questions? Right here.
Yeah, I was looking at your timeline, and in terms of this ballot process, you're gonna send it out 51%. Will we know what the program looks like before we vote on it? Will you have the specifics outlined? Because we don't want to vote on something we don't have the specifics on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a good question. And that in the original slide, you may remember that if there were an original petition, then that would come to the city and there would be a feedback period and a modification of that area, as well as some suggestions perhaps to create a model for it. Now, this is your first go at it. So that's why there is so much on the slides about operational components being developed. In the longer term, should this program move forward, you're gonna have more basis for understanding exactly what the program may look like, because it will already exist. So at this point, you're onto something very, very smart there. We're gonna need the council to endorse moving forward before the next thing can happen in the city.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I would say that from the city's staff perspective, we are committed if it does move to the next step and there is support for pursuing the program, there would be a community engagement element to that as well, so that there would be no surprises before you're ready to vote on it. There'd be numbers associated, all that.
I'm also glad that you're gonna get the council support before we move on.
I think it's important to remember through all this too, this is the baby step into this of just figuring out if there's a desire for the program. So then the next stages would be that, if we go down the path, robust community engagement to figure out the ins and outs of something like this.
Real quickly, also, I don't think that I mentioned, but in the development of this, this first go around, we need to make sure that the program is scalable and that it's equitable and that it could grow potentially in other ways that make sense, right? And so that's got to be endorsed by the council very carefully so that it is fair for all in the future. That makes sense.
Next question. Dean, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just follow up that same question. What I heard was that 1% election, or just starting the process, right? So there wouldn't be a lot of information. It's just a question as to whether we want to go down this planning process. And then there will be a second election when there's more detail, after public participation, all that. But then to say that, I mean, anybody's been in an election, involved in an election in this town knows that that's a really high threshold, and to get 1% of what now is a lot of absentee voters. To weigh into an issue of this magnitude, so this in our neighborhood, in one of this neighborhood. So, I mean, I don't know whose 51% that is, but that's not a city policy at this point. It might be your firm policy, but in Durango, it's not just real estate to start the conversation with a 51% vote. I don't think you're right.
So I'll address the first part of the question, and then if Walker wants to step in on the details of the formula and how the percentage kind of came to be. But just to clarify, we would have a public, the first step would be going to city council and asking for funding to be able to fund the project. And then we would have the public engagement that Clancy was describing. It would be, you know, a month-long process of making sure that we're getting the right fit, and something that has residential support and buy-in, and then it would be go to ballot for voting on. I'm gonna give it to Walker in case there's anything you wanted to add about where that 51% comes from.
So the 51%, again, it's important, and remember the story about Billy Bob. Like we have to know that the community is ready for this. If the people in this room are ready and everyone else in that footprint are not ready, that is a dangerous scenario where the program is not going to succeed at a later chapter.
I've seen your hand up for a while. I'm over at the microphone.
If I understand this program correctly, we're going to buy a permit that basically doesn't allow us to park where we want to park. And it's going to cost us money.
Right.
Thank you for the question. That's a good comment. So a residential permit program is intended to provide residents, and in some cases probably employees that have businesses within that district, access to have preservation to be able to park in their neighborhood. And to not have other business owners or employees that are in the downtown district take away that access to the public parking freeway.
But we can't park in front of our house.
Correct, yeah, this is not intended to be a reserved parking space in front of your residence. The public right-of-way that Kenzie talked about is available for the entire public to use, and so it's not a permit for you to park in front of your house.
So that's traditionally the way it's been. People park in front of their own houses.
Thank you for your comment.
I just wanted to go on top of what the team was saying is that you guys don't live here, so maybe what he was saying and I wanted to say is that a huge majority of people who live downtown are renters. So if we have to get the 51% from the owners of the home, you're gonna have to somehow find out where they live in Phoenix or Park City or somewhere else other than Durango, because I live on East 4th and the block between 7th and 8th has one owner living on that block. Every other home is rented. So if those people who are renting don't have the right to vote for this, that's where we're never gonna get the 51% sound like
We appreciate that feedback. That type of feedback is coming next. And so if we could just, the questions for the question and answer, I value that feedback. We're gonna jump into like that type of like, we wanna hear that type of feedback next, and we're gonna spend an hour on it. Yes.
Hi, how many permits would be allowed per house? I'm thinking of houses currently that are not approved for multiple rental units.
It's my understanding that those types of details would get hammered out later on in the process. Yeah, that's a later on down the line kind of detail that we would have to hammer out. Sweetie.
In 2012, this goes back to renters, La Plata Electric franchise fee at that moment in time was only for property owners. It was deemed not acceptable to that city council. And the city council changed the language to allow renters to also vote for the La Plata Electric franchise fee, just like we're talking about renters here. They should, in my opinion, as a former city councilor, they should be allowed to vote on this particular ballot if it goes that far. And the city council did change it to allow renters to vote in 2012 for that franchise.
Got a question, sweetie?
No, it's a clarification statement because it's renters can't vote.
I promise, I'll give you all time to express your opinion. I promise. All right, yeah, back there.
So in other communities that have similar permit programs to this, how does having guests over work? Do you need to like ask the government for permission? Do you have guest passes that you hand out to your visitors? How does it usually go down?
I don't know.
Pretty simple answer. No, you don't have to go ask the city for permission to have a friend over or have a contractor over work on your house. You would be issued guest passes that they would typically just display on their dashboard when they leave. You take that back.
Marie.
Reinvent the wheel, I'm sure it's out there. Is there any model city situation that we could follow through if we did go through on this whole process? It seems like we're starting over, and why, you know, there's the wheel here, I think it's there.
So I think everything that we just discussed is actually the model. So when I say these are best practice tactics, they are actually things that are implemented in most communities that have a neighborhood or residential permit program. And so it's not reinventing the wheel. What it is though, is number one, ensuring that your council and your community are ready for this and that there's a unified contingent group that is a large enough area and enough base of interest. And that there's also an assessment of how a program like this might work among a multitude of strategies. The granularity, we had a question over here about how many permits. That's a great question, and that's an example of some of these little things that would have to be identified within the specifics of this plan. So you'll see variations on what I talked about from city to city in the number of permits allowed, the number of visitor permits allowed, that kind of thing. And the reason is that the landscapes are slightly different. So the spillover problem's the same, the parameters that we talked about are the same, but it might be more affordable to give more visitor permits or potentially more resident permits in certain areas versus others, certain cities rather than others.
Okay, we're gonna take one more question. I know there's a lot of questions in the room, and so I wanna just make sure that you all know, I'll let you know how to get a hold of us with those questions. If we didn't get them answered, we'll hang around at the end of the evening for a little bit too to answer some questions. But I want to make sure that we hear from all of you in our breakout session, and we spend enough time for you all to be able to do that. So, right back here, your hands.
What's the parking cost?
Don't know yet. That would be the permit fee would be discussed and hammered out down the line.
Is there an average nationally where these kind of programs are implemented already?
I think it varies widely.
Yeah, the best practice is to base that permit cost on cost recovery of operating a permit program. I know that's not answering your question directly, but it's going to be different in every community on what it costs to operate.
Okay, that was a quick one. One more.
I am dead set on 51%. The reason I'm asking, because I think Dean has a really good point. In 2023, only 34% of the electorate voted for the city council. And in 2021 and 19, it was 37%. If we can't get more than 40% of the people to vote for city council, why would you use 51%? The question is, are you dead set on this? Setting an impossible, the bar is too high.
Dead set is not really relevant here. What we're here to do is talk about what other cities do, what best practice recommendations exist. And what's important, again, is that think about some of the context of this idea. Do you want to implement a program that the majority of your neighbors don't want to participate in? That's a question, right? So we're not here to dictate exactly what happens here, but we did want to make sure that we're addressing how this works in other locations, how it works well in other locations, and what the general parameters should be and the consideration should be.
Okay, we're gonna jump into the breakout session so you all can, give us your feedback. So if you all could find a table with a notebook, this is where we're gonna really ask how you feel and think about it. And specifically what? So take a moment, find a group. Take a moment, find a group. I see open spots here. Is everybody sitting at a table with a notepad and markers? There's open spots here, there's open spots here, and then we're gonna do, somebody to be read a recorder. So you need to find somebody who's willing to write and present their writing. Notepad, somebody who's willing to report out to the whole group. Everybody, I would like to encourage you to participate, if you're willing. You've heard from us, we haven't had an opportunity to hear from you, and that's why we're here. We would really like to get your feedback. I do encourage you to participate. What we will do is the feedback that we get from here, we're gonna, whatever you write on this notepad will be typed out and put into our entire comprehensive report. We also are recording this, so we have the recording available as well of your feedback. So, our first question is, what's working well with parking in the neighborhoods east of downtown, and what do you not want to change? Well, let's start there. Let's start off positive. What do you not want to change? Next question. Where are you experiencing issues and what are they? Where are you experiencing issues and what are they? It may be helpful to know what avenue or street you live on, but this is for the entire community as well, so it's not necessarily a requirement. So, where are you experiencing issues and what are they? Okay, we're moving on. Question number 3. What elements would you want to see in the neighborhood parking program? And what elements would you not like? What elements would you like to see in the parking program? And what elements would you not like? Everybody get everything on paper? Hold on, don't leave yet, 'cause there's a final tool that's gonna be big time data, so don't leave, okay? What I would like going to do is take a few minutes, we're gonna take about 20 minutes to go around the room and give us the highlights of what your group discussed. So you can focus on whatever you want to focus on. These I'm gonna take with me tonight, we're gonna take them with us and type them up and put them, like I said, in the comprehensive, like, feedback report, okay? So, don't feel like you have to capture everything that's on your sheet, we don't have time for that. So give us the highlights, okay? And elect somebody at your table who you feel confident that can do that.
You have a voice on.
Okay.
And Okay, here's some highlights from our team table. What's working well? We, in our region, we're thinking that street parking is working better than avenue parking. We became pseudo-related to the increased distance, on Third Avenue of being able to park, create a better sightline for safety for pedestrians and for, folks who are driving. We think that was an enhancement. That was all we have for that one.
All of them, okay, from them all.
Where are we experiencing issues? Gosh, just about everywhere. It sounded like from our table, but a few highlights are the area directly, next to and surrounding the Smiley Building. We've identified that area, particularly with the amount of businesses in there, just not enough space for visitors. East Fourth, for folks who don't have alley access. Sixth Avenue, maybe some challenges with commercial businesses utilizing maybe more spaces in the residential zone.
Close to College Drive.
Close to College Drive, thank you. And then we also have just a few questions about if there could be considerations around, let's see, the density or occupancy percentage for ADUs, and just understanding if you have an ADU that can house 4 people, how do you, and maybe that's some grandfathered in, how does that play into this? What we're talking about. And then let's pull these 2 elements that we would like to see. Free parking for residents, at least one. We would love to perhaps increase curb cut options for folks who maybe been denied or required variance in the past to maybe help support and alleviate the need to provide so many permits for residents. And we would not like to see an increase in code enforcement. This group had discussed, we're already seeing a lot of code enforcers in our neighborhoods, have been maybe overly aggressive, ticket happy lately. And so we would not like to see an increase in policing, as it relates to the permits. Anything else?
Perfectly done. Nice, thank you. Okay, who's next? All right.
Okay,
Highlights.
so for the first question was, what is working well? An East Fifth resident said the parking is working well as it is. The East Third resident gave no response to that, and the East Fourth resident said nothing is working. And so what do we not want to change is accessibility and free parking. The second question is, what are you experiencing issues and what are they? First is no street cleaning due to parked cars blocking, no ability to remove snow due to parked cars, cars stored on the street for over 10 days, people sleeping in campers and RVs, downtown workers parking in our neighborhood, one car taking up space for two cars, and then special events, snow down, etc. And what do we want in a parking program? Discourage downtown workers from parking in our neighborhood, possibly having paid parking, limit number of cars perhaps, and limit the length of parking time. And what do we not want? And the only response was from the Fifth Avenue owner was no permits.
You ready back here?
your stand, so, okay.
Your highlights. Yeah.
Okay. Where I live on the 500 block of East Third Avenue, we're all experiencing, what's going to happen with, parking, on the 500 block, 400 block, and so on. Because I talked to Carlos, that was, working on the hotel project last week. And I said, I went down into the garage when it did say don't go in, and I said, I noticed that there's not a lot of parking down there for everything that you erected. He said, oh, that's right. And I said, well, how much, is there enough room for, how many parking places do you have for all these guests? Only 50%.
Oh, wow.
I said, so I went to meetings at 949 Second Avenue, and, and I'm told there's gonna be parking for all the guests, plus 20 parking spaces for, employees. Well, that's out the window. And so, what's basically, in my opinion, what's going to happen is that they've got to replace, they put the last segment of the hotel up yesterday. So everything's up, so let's say, oh, well, what are you gonna do? We're all ready to open up, and so that is, and if you have permitted parking, the people that are from the hotel that couldn't park in the garage are gonna park all around the neighborhood. And if it is permitted parking, they'll park there anyway, because if I get a ticket, I'm going home anyway, and I don't have to pay. So, that's the gist.
That's what I like.
That's what I like.
Thank you for that. All right.
Represent Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Avenues. Oh, here, we represent Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Avenues. And the first, question, we all agree that code enforcement was effective. And, we would like to see, in relation to that, an increase in fines for those who are violating or do need to be removed. And decrease the time that it takes to be ticketed, it takes to, allow the car there before it can sit there. Once it's ticketed, it can sit there until it's actually, booted. Yeah, before it's booted. We'd like to see that increase, or decrease that time, because it's often, it gets ticketed and word gets out and the car's moved and it come back again. So that part of code enforcement we'd like to see. We just noted, this is common sense, parking impact decreases with each street east, and seasonal impact of the cars parking in the area is same throughout the year. Second question, RVs and multiple vehicles from the same home continue to be a influence in that. Rentals with 4 to 6 people, each vehicle owner is also an impact. Train traffic spillover, special events, people. So that's for all that. And the third question is, we would like to see the parking initiative, whatever happens, would interface with the street cleaning and snow plowing, so that we don't have these big piles of snow in February because one car's got stuck there or stayed there. Also, if there was any kind of a permit system, we don't want to see signage. We like the residential look, so some way to make it look just like it was before. And then, because these parking lots aren't, this is my personal opinion, the parking lots that we do have, these paid parking lots that are unused, why doesn't the city just say, heck with it, get in there and use it for free? Because that might alleviate all this problem. If these parking spaces if these parking lots are not being used because you have to pay for it, well, why not make it free? And avoid all this cost of trying to do this. I mean, that to me looks like logic. Thanks for reading.
Okay, who's next? Who's ready?
Okay, we have residents from 4th Ave, 7th Street, 5th Avenue, 12th Street at our table. We lost one of our table mates, but we have property owners, owner occupied, we have a lot of rentals on these streets, and we have some businesses too. So what's working well, we all agreed that, at least in our respective street bases, there is a lot of neighborhood cooperation and respect for each other's space. So communication with neighbors works well for us. Access to code enforcement where there are problems, abandoned vehicles, you can call the city, they'll come and help you. We didn't have anything we didn't want to change, other than what's good. Issues we're experiencing, some of these will be repetitive, but snow removal is inadequate. Makes it hard to park the car, and there's less parking in the winter. Street cleaning also. Parking of unhitched trailers and oversized RVs that are left in the street. We thought those should be parked off-street, period. People sleeping in their vehicles has been an issue in our neighborhood. Too many cars per household. So maybe a permit system has a graduated fee or even a cap on the number of permits you can have, you know, to find off-street parking. An inadequate balance of parking requirements for ADUs and multifamily dwellings paired with the primary residence. Even though the city requires off-street parking for ADUs, a lot of times those spaces aren't used for the ADUs. They're used for something else, those cars go slow onto the street. Lack of enforcement, contrary to what we heard over here about wanting less code enforcement. I think if the city's gonna make rules, you have to enforce them, and to leave it to residents to have to take on the burden of complaint-driven enforcement, I think it's just fundamentally unfair. If you're gonna have a rule, I think the city should enforce it. Elements desired in the new policy, I said this already, with graduated fees for multiple cars, RVs and unhitched trailers off street parking, a cap on permits, improved snow removal, free permits for residents. I'm not sure when fees would start to apply, but at least one, maybe 2 free permits. An online portal for residents to manage this would be a lot easier than paper permits that will get lost or hanging on your mirror when your guests leave town. Differentiation between streets and avenues. A lot of the streets don't have alley access, in their small lots, so they don't have street parking either, whereas the avenues do have alley access, so there has to be unique treatment for each of those. Some kind of free or reduced price for low income service workers for permits if there is a fee associated. And then all of this has to be paired with the city providing some kind of free or cheap downtown park that's convenient for workforce and tourists to use. You can't restrict parking in one place and not provide it elsewhere. So the idea of using the existing lots for free is a great one. And also integrating all of this with the multimodal plan. So you've got good connectivity for walking, biking, and using the transit.
Thank you. I have a question, because I'm hearing this one, and I am not involved with any project at all other than the community engagement piece. But I'm curious, who all knows about $5 parking downtown for all day at the transit center? Spread the word.
Okay, so we had folks, a good variety of opinions, and we were able to agree on a couple things. That first question of, what is good now? At least what is happening now, at least it's convenient and somewhat simple. There is no permitting or anything like that. If there's not a parking spot, you can hopefully find something else, and that way it's simple. But the problems that we see are more of, we have like a residence to parking ratio, where you've got maybe one house that now has 8 tenants and many cars in front of it, or even one house with one family with a lot of vehicles. We see a lot of employees parking for their jobs downtown. These the avenues are going to be the most convenient place and they don't have the time restrictions that some of the parking spots downtown do. We see issues with the larger vehicles and being parked for long periods of time. So RVs, trailers, fleet vehicles on some areas on the south side of town. Of course, spillover from downtown businesses, special events as they occur, and it's an off occasion. They happen every now and then, but that's when I think we see like the peak of Bedlam and the busy parking on the east side. People sleeping in vans, in RVs. There not being space for those large vehicles downtown just implicitly means that they have to park on the east side to access anything downtown. What we would like to see, and I think a lot of people went immediately to permits, but there are other alternatives. There are time limits. We talked a lot about efficient spacing, the snow being an issue. In the big winters like 18, 19, 22, 23, people not clearing snow in the right way and leading to built up snow accumulation leads like very bad parking. But even without the snow, there's no excuse. There's just very bad parking, and something needs lines delineating, maybe proper spacing for vehicles, so we could more efficiently park vehicles on open streets and avenues, and other alternatives for permits, just for ease of use for people. And we're concerned when it comes to absentee or non-involved property owners or landlords who aren't interested in fixing this problem, which is a problem affecting all of us and needs to be dealt with. Why would someone who maybe doesn't live here and is only concerned about, their tenants and having more hoops to jump through and having people rent, whether it's short-term or long-term rentals, they're not going to want to be involved in this process. When right now, and this is, again, it goes back to this is the most easiest and convenient thing. We don't have to worry about permitting. It just kind of gets dealt with on a day-to-day basis. So there's a concern for keeping property owners involved instead of just passing the buck down the line and having to deal with it when it just gets worse.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you up? You ready?
Sure.
All right. Okay, so we are 4th Avenue and 3rd Avenue, so for what is working well, we currently think the existing status quo with no permits is actually working. As a group, we felt that we didn't want the hassle and potential disagreements of dealing with permits. What's not working well is during busy times, there can be no parking for service workers or visitors. A lot of the same points have already been iterated. On 3rd Avenue, there's concern about accidents, and I think that was addressed at one point, like if limiting the number of cars that can be parked and farther back from the curb might help alleviate some accidents due to either impaired drivers or just the sheer volume of traffic that's going and the volume of cars that are being parked. For elements we'd like to see, certainly 24-hour access for residents, so no residential restrictions if you're a resident of the street. Residents having no charge temporary passes for visitors and service workers so that you weren't being charged for your pass as well as visitor passes. Non-residents without a residential permit pass would be limited to either 2 to 3 hours, but the city does need to create or build a parking garage to accommodate employees of the downtown establishments who are overflow parking up onto the avenues. And this is particularly of concern with police officers and city and county employees, because with the new office building, there's concern about spillover of more workers being there and then the spillover of the parking if the city isn't gonna have somewhere for the employees to park. And elements we don't like, when we don't want to see permits. That's very brave of you. I know,
It's very brave
that's
of
why
you
we
to
didn't want to
say
say
that.
What's working well? Not much. Except that in some areas, there's adequate supply of parking spaces. If you talk about 8th Avenue, 7th Avenue, maybe 6th Avenue, you see it. It's on 3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue in the streets where we have substantial problems. So again, it's not an all for one kind of thing. Issues, if you limit parking, where are the people going to go? I mean, you need to do something about, and as Greg pointed out, you really need to to solve the whole downtown parking issue. And there's lots of other issues coming up, as maybe before you solve this one. Some areas, again, have problems, others don't. One of the issues is the data that you look at when some of these things come out are incredibly deceptive, because if I look on my street and my block keeps saying that I have totally green, and I went out this morning at 7 o'clock, and every space is taken. So I'm saying the data, to have valid data, you have to use at least 2 different methods, and they only use 1, so it's not very validating. The other thing we're looking at is what's going to happen when the hotel is completed. I've been making some inquiries in terms of, is parking going to be free for the guests, or are they going to have to pay for parking? And if they have to pay for parking, I know where they're going to park, and it's not going to be in the parking garage. And the other issue we have is next steps downtown. We've lost how many parking spaces, right? 50. And then the hotel, even when the hotel goes up, they're going to change the parking on Fifth Street, so there's going to be more spaces that are going to be gone. So again, as we pointed out, you need to deal with the downtown parking first. Parking garage came up, really need a parking garage. The other one is to do something with rentals. I have one rental on my street that they have 4 cars. Okay, and we all can't have 4 cars. So it makes it a good start. All right, what we would like is low cost, easy to manage. We want the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. Meet the needs of residents and not make this a resident-centric parking program and not a staff-centric program. Make it flexible so it can accommodate visitors and contractors. Enforcement is going to be critical. We want to have something that's a parking permit program a little closer to residents so we don't have to walk 2 blocks. And also to make sure that we have something for the disabled. And my question is, it's a good question. If cars are there for a long time to simply park, which is an issue, I mean, what I do is I think it's an abandoned vehicle and I call code enforcement. Why can't we just have somebody give them tickets? I don't know if that's possible or not. What we don't want is a high cost, no enforcement, and again, why do we have to walk a couple of blocks? I'm thinking of women who are pregnant carrying wheelchairs.
All right, as a pregnant woman, I don't like that excuse. So, I'm not currently pregnant, I'm too old, but I really don't like the, let's think about the poor pregnant mom.
No, this came up, no, let me.
No, I do know it came up.
A couple of years ago, it came up, we had a pregnant woman carrying groceries, and that is a big deal.
As someone who's had 3 babies and carried 2 children and a couple bags of groceries.
It's not good for us.
I'm just saying, like, they need to.
Okay, we're moving
Oh,
on.
just to
Yeah,
say-
we still have one more table. You ready to share it out over here?
Whether I like it or not, didn't like it. Okay, we've got residents here, 3rd Avenue, I live on 11th Street, and so forth. So we've all got, different problems in our own neighborhood. But what's not working is, we've always had this problem of downtown employees parking in our neighborhood. And that's because the city has failed to meet the requirements for parking downtown. Always just thought, we'll just let them go into the neighborhoods and to hell with everybody else. We've got, a business, that is located on 3rd Avenue, non-traditional business, and that's encroaching on 3rd Avenue. And so that, again, they should be provided, if you're gonna have a business on 3rd Avenue, you need to provide off-street parking. And not depend on the neighborhood for, your parking. Anyway, so, again, our opinion is that, again, this lack of parking downtown is fueling all of this, and it's gotten worse and worse over the years, so. And again, the increased density that's been allowed because of ADUs, again, they say you're supposed to have off-street parking. I have an ADU myself that's grandfathered in, but, again,
when you don't enforce that, and people are using their off-street parking to park their travel trailer and their RV and stuff, and then their guests have to go onto the street, that's not right. So, question number 3 was, elements we liked or not liked. Nobody, I think, likes the idea of the cost involved in the permit system. But there's got to be some simpler way to alleviate this problem. And again, it's going to cost money downtown, and they don't seem to want to spend it there. You're putting a burden all onto the neighborhoods that we didn't create the problem to begin with. It's been brought on us by other people. So again, I think I'll shut up now. I think I've reiterated what a lot of other people have said. So.
All right, that's everybody. Did I miss anybody? Any tables? Okay. Thank you very much for taking the time to do that. Like I said, don't go anywhere with those sheets. I don't know if you want to walk out the door with a giant piece of paper, but just in case you do, don't take that with you. That's valuable information for us. We're going to move on to a final poll. Would you support a neighborhood parking permit program for the residential area east of downtown? Given every bit of information that we've given you about what that may look like. You know, we don't have those details yet, I know. But as you see it right now, would you support it? And there's the QR code. If you can't get that right now, feel free to walk up here too. But if you can't get that to work right now, this is going on the Engage Durango, that project page for the neighborhood parking permit program. So be sure to follow that. But take a moment and submit your answer if you wouldn't mind. And don't go anywhere yet, because I have a few more things, housekeeping things that I want to make sure that you all know before you go home and really chew on all this stuff, because I know you're probably going to want to give us more feedback, right? Okay, does everybody have that? Anybody need that up anymore?
Yeah.
You still need it? Okay. Take your time. I'm going to keep talking at you for a second. The Engage Durango website, the engage.durangocode.gov, is super, super valuable. If you are online anyway, you're scrolling at night, whatever you're doing, there are a lot of different projects that the city's working on, this being one of them. You can follow specific projects. We will send you updates as media releases come out, new information comes up. That is a great spot to start for following this project. We're going to put, like I said, each of these polling questions up live on that page. So we're going to be hearing from not just this room, but for anybody, we're going to do social media posts about it, all that stuff, so folks can weigh in on these polling questions as well. So we're trying to do a pretty comprehensive feedback report that not only includes tonight, but for folks like myself, I have 2 kids. It's really hard to get out in the evening when you got babies at home and provide your input, even though you really want to. So we'll also be asking folks for their input if they couldn't make it tonight. So just be aware of that. Not beware, but just know that. But I appreciate you all coming tonight. The next steps really are, we're just going to keep getting feedback and then make a decision on what's next, and we'll keep you all posted on that. And so this, like I said, baby steps into this parking permit program. We're not even sure if we're running with it yet. So thank you so much for providing your feedback tonight. Don't forget about the survey. There's the QR code for the survey as well to let us know how we did. And thank you again all for coming.